Unit 5 is a short story about saying goodbye to a family cat called Tiger. From why they have to say goodbye, that is the road accident, to how they say goodbye, meaning the details of this funeral the family holds for him. Although these two parts include all the information we need about saying goodbye to Tiger, they are not the most powerful nor the most important. The most important ones would be the opening and the ending. The opening line sets the scene for us, that it is raining, which usually reminds us of crying, and the writer does go on and tell us that it is a moment that his heart is about to break. So the first line gives us the atmosphere for the rest of the story. And after all the details about the road accident and all that the family has done for Tiger, from gathering flowers, having a small coffin, giving a speech, even playing music, just as we feel that the family should feel better after they've done all these to wrap up their journey with Tiger, the writer tells us, after all this, he still feels so painful and nothing could take away the pain at that moment. It is because of the opening and the ending that we feel the strong emotions the writer's family has for Tiger. Without these two lines, the story will be lacking emotional impact and be much less powerful. But of course, it is not only the opening and the ending that is creating the impact for us. The descriptions that the writer has play a big part as well. If you remember how the 5 senses are very important in giving descriptions, the writer describes what is seen, felt, and heard in the story. We see the garden, the box, and flowers. We felt the weight of the box that was carrying Tiger, and we heard the music that Emily played on the flute. Frankly speaking, this is not an exceptional piece of work, but we know it is not necessary to include all of the 5 senses. It will just give us a more complete image of what's happening. The writer actually did a pretty good job describing the 3 senses that are included. Instead of simply saying, I see, I feel, I hear, these details are laid out for us more naturally and therefore blends into the overall understanding better than just having them listed out. But while we are at it, if you could include the remaining 2 senses of smell and taste, what would you describe? Perhaps the flowers, the soil, and rain? Whichever you choose to describe, you will still have to choose how to describe them. For example, for a cheerful story, you can say that the rain smells fresh and clean, like a new beginning. Or in this story, when it's so upsetting at a funeral, you could say that it smells sour, and because of the wetness, it smells moldy. In a happy story, you could say that the snacks are delicious, it's sweet, it's aromatic. But in this story, perhaps all the delicious snacks suddenly become bland, that is, tasteless. Or in a story, you can even describe it with a simile or metaphor to say that the food tastes like chalk, to really help your readers feel what you want to describe. There are 2 language patterns in this story that are pretty useful. The first one is, I could not stop crying. In this story, it is used to show a strong emotion that is so overwhelming the writer couldn't stop crying. But it is not only used to talk about emotions. Instead, this structure is more about the difference between using a gerund or a to infinitive after the word stop. We say gerunds are used to describe things that have already happened, and to infinitives relate to future plans, such as, I plan to start doing more exercise starting tomorrow. If you compare these 2 examples, I couldn't stop singing along means you did sing along and you couldn't stop that action. But if you say I couldn't stop to sing along, it means you were doing something else and you couldn't stop that action to start singing along to a song. So this structure is not really a fixed phrase that we can use. But there is one fixed phrase that you can learn to express this meaning. That is, I couldn't help, or I can't help. It means however much you try to control yourself, you cannot make yourself stop doing something. I couldn't help or I can't help is always followed by a gerund. The other pattern is it's hard to believe. This usually relates to surprises because it's something that shocks you for being so unbelievable. But it can also be used to describe things you find unlikely to be true or anything that gives you too much of a shock, such as, right now it is hard to believe that school is still suspended because it is so unprecedented in Hong Kong. Now let's take a look at the answers. I've labeled where the answers can be found in the text, and we'll go through some of the answers that may need a little bit more explanation. Question 2. In case you wrote lying as the answer, it is not acceptable because lying is the opposite of sitting or standing, but you can still move your arms and legs when you are lying down. However, still means you are not moving at all. So, still is the exact opposite of moving. As for question 4, you have to connect the information from two different sentences from the text using the word and because you are only allowed to write one sentence in this question. Question 6. Whenever you are asked to name what a pronoun refers to, always look backwards. In this case, once you trace backwards, you will know that it is referring to the narrator's mother. It is wrong if you wrote my mother or my sister for questions 5 and 6, because it is not your family, but the narrator's family. Questions 7 and 8 are quite straightforward, but it's a little bit tricky for question 9, mostly because you have to understand the paragraph and then locate the synonyms in the words that are given. For example, organize is the synonym of arrange in this context. And you have to know the meaning of some more challenging words, such as kennel means doghouse, so between tiger's coffin and tiger's doghouse, we would use coffin since we're talking about his funeral. You also have to know that hefty means heavy, and since heavy is mentioned in the text, we will replace it in our new paragraph with hefty. For question 11, you see that I have labeled two sections in the text that gives you the answers for part 1 and 3. However, for part 2, the information is simply not given, so it is not found in the text and there's no way to locate it. For question 12, I would like to add a very quick reminder on the difference between touching and touched. The song that Emily played was touching, and therefore you were touched. The song is the active agent that is causing you to passively feel touched. The answers to question 15 are easily found through the text if you paid attention to who did what during the funeral. Question 14, however, has one keyword that connects to what we said about the story in the very beginning. It is asking how the narrator felt throughout the funeral. The answer is heartbroken because he mentions how he feels that way in the beginning and also how sad he is in the very end. In any other story, if there happens to be a change in mood in the middle, the answer could be different. For the vocabulary section, I've highlighted the clues in each question that tells you what form or tenses to use for each word. For example, on this page, questions 1, 3, 4, 5 should all be in the past tense because there are other verbs in the sentences that are in the past tense and we usually stay consistent within the same sentence. As for question 2, we use the base form of words after the word to. For questions 6 to 10, the clues relate more to the meaning of the words than the form. So I'd like to talk about the meaning of two of the words. For question 6, the word earth in small letters means soil. If you capitalize the E, it becomes a name and would refer to the planet that we live on. So pay attention to the use of capitalization when you use this word. The other word is question 7, stray. The word stray is used as a noun here, but its adjective takes the same form as well. So it would describe animals that live on the streets as stray cats and stray dogs. The last part is a list of words related to grief and comfort that you can learn and use in daily life. Grief is a strong kind of sadness that we feel after we've lost someone who means a lot to us. Comfort in this context is the kind of understanding and warmth that we give people who are feeling grief. This is the list of words that are related to grief. They are all in the noun form, but when we say them, it's more common to use the adjective form, except for agony and distress. We do say someone is in agony or in distress quite often, but for the rest of them, we would say someone is anguished, heartbroken, miserable, and tormented. They all relate to sadness and a kind of suffering that you feel after you've lost someone. These words are about comfort, and there's a bit more variation when we use them. For some of them, we still just use the adjective form. For example, he is compassionate, or he is sympathetic, both meaning they are capable of understanding what people feel. If you say he is assured, it means he is given a promise and now feels more secured. For the word condolence, we would say you have my condolences, or simply my condolences, to mean that I'm sorry for your loss and I understand your pain. Consolation has a similar meaning as the rest of the words, but we would say if it's any consolation, to suggest something to make people feel better in a bad situation. For example, I understand that you are worried we do not have enough food supply, but if it's any consolation, I just bought a dozen of tissue rolls. And finally, solace. Just as we would say he feels comfort, it's more common for us to say he finds solace in reading, which means he finds peace or comfort in reading when he's feeling upset.